It's very interesting. We're also seeing, just to add to what David was talking about, we have a couple of companies in India right now that are looking for, these are later stage companies, that are looking for acquisitions to acquire companies actually here in the U.S. And these are certain products, certain front office capabilities, sales capabilities, and so on. So, the whole M&A marketplace is changing dramatically. These are $80 to $100 million companies that are going to go out and come out and buy some companies here in the Valley or on the East Coast, or perhaps in Europe, to sort of get presence in those countries. But on IPOs, it's interesting.
Halak, so maybe you don't allow yourself to think about liquidity events yet because you consider yourself still early, but I'll still put the question to you anyway. You get to pick M&A or IPO.
So I think IPO, Pramod covered it well. I think pretty much on everyone's mind in India right now, the IPO issue, whether to list in NASDAQ, NYSE, is a Sarbanes-Oxley issue. You want to put yourself on that through that drilling process. Some have decided to do so. Others are deciding to go
and there's a mix. There's a Mumbai listing and then a ADR further down the road.
But that will again cause some aspects of Sarbanes-Oxley to come in the moment you go into ADR.
But you can address that later as you're more mature, but still have a public.
But Bombay Stock Exchange right now, again, may be overheated according to us, but is definitely a very good option. Though, I mean, it's giving almost similar returns as the U.S. exchanges.
It's a different panel, but understanding the dynamics of the Mumbai Stock Exchange or Hong Kong versus AIM or NASDAQ, NYSE is a very interesting one as well. Very different in terms of the makeup of the buyers and some of the rules and stuff like that. Jack, how do you look at it? I mean, China has a very different, maybe 5 years now we could be talking about a Shanghai Stock Exchange.
Absolutely. I think most of the startups, they all dream to go IPO. And as David said, there's a lot of competition, and it's very difficult to separate the winners from the losers initially. But if you are a winner, actually, before you talk about winners, for people who don't understand what that phenomenon is, and it's kind of like Chinatown. There are like 100, 200 restaurants, Chinese restaurants. Everyone is a mom and pop shop, right? They all compete with each other. They all can survive. So from an entrepreneur perspective, they actually make good amount of money. From a VC perspective, it's very lousy. They will never make it, right? Until 30 years later, P.F. Chang finally figured out how to actually do a nationwide restaurant. And that's really happening in China. So for the few winners, if they figure out the formula, they can go, they will go. And
you have lots of options. I mean, whether it's Hong Kong,
Shanghai, you can go to London. And I think, there's the huge change from last year. Last year, I asked the CEO of Baidu, and Robin Li, and he was very happy with NASDAQ. He said, people were talking about the stocks and all of that stuff. I didn't feel it. I think he will change his mind this year now. And most of my friends who are actually ready to go IPO are thinking about other places now.
So is there a Gucci factor? I mean, China is very brand conscious sometimes. Is there a Gucci factor about NASDAQ versus, let's say, Hong Kong?
Yeah, there is. There is.
I would claim from my perspective that.
But London is as good as
like that.
As NASDAQ.
But that's not the case with India, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
India,
on the contrary, people are very happy to go on Bombay Stock Exchange and somehow feel proud about it.
But get higher multiples.
But what's interesting is
for now at least.
What's interesting, the number of Chinese companies going public in NASDAQ, the venture-backed versus state-owned enterprises, have been very steady the last 3 years. But if you look at the Hong Kong main board, venture-backed companies that are going public is sharply increasing, and the pipeline's huge. And so, yes, there's the Gucci factor, but the ones that normally would have come to NASDAQ 3 years ago are all flooding to the main board.
Right, absolutely. So we're getting one final group of questions, one set of questions for the group, and that has to do with a story time, basically, which I asked them to think about, what's if there was, in your experience, in their experience, if there's one thing they could tell an entrepreneur that they would do differently from their experience that is beyond the conventional wisdom, what would it be? And after we do that, then we'll go to the audience and ask for questions as well, too. So Jack, if there's one thing you could tell someone that's this beaming entrepreneur that, with your experience, you'd say, do this so that, because I didn't do that, what would that be?
China water is very deep. Don't think you know. Even you're born there, grow up there. I spent the first 24 years over there. They are so difficult. It is so difficult to do business in China. You have to relearn and learn again every 6 months. You have to change your strategy and your tactics and to do business in China.
So in contrast to Pramod's statement about backing returnees, I mean, some returnees in the Chinese entrepreneurial world have been away from China too long that they're not returnees per se, really. I mean, so they may know, sort of Silicon Valley startup experience, but they don't know the infrastructure of China. They don't have the network of people to hire, which is being in the network, what that means.
I think that is true about India also, particularly. I mean, again, I would bring my own example. If I hadn't started IBM India Research Lab, I wouldn't know how to start this either. But I think there is another part, which is that there is a middle layer of management, project management, a CFO level type of people that are missing in India. You have to be very, very careful that you have that particular layer well established early on. Otherwise, the whole quality can just go to hell.
I think that's a global statement.
Yeah,
I think that
but particularly more about probably India, maybe about China, because they're just growing so rapidly.
Right. Some would argue the U.S. as well, but Pramod, what's about some pearls of wisdom for yourself? For an entrepreneur, yeah. Keep it to India and say, I mean, of all the things I've done in India, if I could do something differently and I would advise someone to do that, what would that be?
Well, let's put that on a humorous note. I think it's very important for entrepreneurs to pick the right VCs. And I say that tongue in cheek, right? But no, it's very true though. A lot of especially for companies that are getting started there and their markets are out here. They gotta find folks that are willing to learn the product and the company, and then willing to spend time with their potential customers, opening doors for them. Extremely important. And this gets into all kinds of discussions about global VCs versus localized VCs. I mean, this came true to me very, very succinctly about a year ago. I was talking to an entrepreneur in Israel, right? And we invest in Israel as well. And he was here in the Valley raising money. He had just started his tours of VCs. And I happened to talk to him, and I said to him, so I assume you're talking to local venture capitalists in Israel. This is a third-time entrepreneur. He looked at me and he says, I'm not talking to a single local venture capitalist in Israel. And I was floundered. I says, why? And he says, Pramod, my markets are here. He says, what would a local venture capitalist in India that's not connected here do for me? So he says, and eventually he took money from a venture capitalist, a global venture capitalist that has an office in Israel, and from ourselves. Because his aim was, he says, yeah, and on his board is the local venture capitalist in Israel from this global VC firm. But he says, but I want to call on everyone here and be able to make sure that they can open doors for me. I think it's very important. That's what I would tell a venture capitalist. I tell an entrepreneur, be careful who you take money from and make sure that you get a commitment that they're going to help you and open doors for you.
David, closing answer.
The old VC adage has always been focus, 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 right? You tell your company, don't do too many things, just focus on one thing. And, in China, it has a totally different meaning. And what it is, because the CEOs of these companies see their buddies starting a restaurant and making more money than they are, and they, the tide is rising so fast, they get so tempted to do so many different things. It's not just doing your own company, helping his friend run a restaurant, or doing X, Y, and Z, signing up to be a chairman of another company, and because everything is growing and you can't see what's going on. And so, when we tell a Chinese CEO, focus, 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 it's about, can you just